The summer sun rose over the island of Saipan on July 8, 1944. The air was thick with smoke, the cliffs stained with blood, and the cries of despair carried by the wind. Japanese soldiers and civilians had been told there was no mercy, that capture meant torture, death, and dishonor. Mothers clutched their children and leapt into the sea. Fathers pulled grenades close to their chests. It was the image of war at its cruelest. But in that darkness, a young Marine, barely 18 years old, a boy who weighed little more than 120 pounds, chose a different path. His name was Louis Gabbaldon, and in one single day, he would convince more than 800 people to surrender. He would do it not with a rifle, not with grenades, but with words spoken in a foreign tongue, words of reassurance and promises of life. Stay with us, because this is not just another story. This is the future our ancestors dreamed of. Subscribe to see more truths that have been hidden from the media. We are here with you to bring the truth to light. Gabbaldon's journey did not begin on the battlefield. It began in the streets of Boyle Heights, Los Angeles, a neighborhood where cultures met and struggled to survive the Great Depression. Born on March 22, 1926, the son of a Mexican-American family, Gabbaldon's childhood was marked by hardship. At the age of 12, his life changed forever when he was welcomed into the home of the Nanao family, Japanese Americans who treated him as one of their own. Around their dinner table, he learned not only the language but also the customs, the values of honor and family, the quiet ways of respect. These lessons, learned in peace, would one day echo across the cliffs of Saipan in the midst of war. Louis Gabbaldon grew up as one of 7 children in a Mexican-American family during the hard years of the Great Depression. His parents struggled to provide, and young Guy often roamed the streets of Boyle Heights, a neighborhood alive with immigrants from many nations. Life could have pushed him toward trouble, but instead, it brought him into the care of another family that would change his destiny forever. At 12 years old, Guy moved in with the Nanao family, Japanese Americans who opened their home to him. Though never legally adopted, he became a son to them. Around their table, he ate bowls of rice, learned to use chopsticks, and listened to conversations in Japanese. He picked up the language in the most natural way, not from books or classrooms, but from daily life, from laughter, arguments, and quiet talks about respect, loyalty, and duty. More than words, he learned the values of a culture, the importance of honor, the weight of family, and the dignity in restraint. These lessons sank deep into his heart. Then came the morning of December 7th, 1941. Japan struck Pearl Harbor, and the world changed overnight. Fear swept through. America, in anger, turned against Japanese Americans. Within months, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, forcing more than 120,000 people into internment camps. The Nanao family, who had given Guy love and shelter, were uprooted and sent to Heart Mountain, Wyoming. Guy watched as his adopted family was driven away behind barbed wire, punished not for what they had done, but for who they were. For him, the war was no longer distant. It was personal. He had lived in 2 worlds, Mexican-American by birth and Japanese-American by adoption, and now he saw both worlds collide in conflict. At 17, determined to serve his country and to use the knowledge he carried, he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. His Japanese was not perfect, but it was conversational and alive with the rhythms of daily speech. The Marine Corps saw potential in his skills and assigned him as a scout and observer with the 2nd Marines, 2nd Marine Division. By the spring of 1944, Gabbaldon was preparing for Operation Forager, the invasion of the Mariana Islands. Saipan, a small island in the Pacific, held 30,000 Japanese troops and tens of thousands of civilians. Military intelligence painted a grim picture. The Japanese army had spread propaganda with deadly purpose. Families were given grenades, children were told to stab Americans with bamboo spears, and civilians were warned that surrender meant rape, torture, or worse. Posters and broadcasts described Americans as monsters who would eat children alive. This campaign of fear was so powerful that when the Americans approached, many Japanese families were ready to take their own lives rather than surrender. On June 15, 1944, Gabbaldon came ashore with the invasion force. The battle for Saipan raged for nearly a month. American forces fought hard, suffering thousands of casualties as they pushed northward across the island. The Japanese soldiers resisted fiercely, and behind them, terrified civilians followed orders to retreat, carrying with them their children and their fears. The closer the battle drew to the northern cliffs of the island, the more desperate the situation became. For Guy Gabbaldon, this was the crucible that would test everything he had learned. Unlike other Marines, he carried not only a rifle, but also a language and an understanding that could reach across the chasm of fear. While others shouted demands through bullhorns in stiff military Japanese, he slipped into the shadows alone, speaking softly, respectfully, in the words of everyday life. His journey into the night was about to begin. From the very first nights on Saipan, Guy Gabbaldon began breaking the rules. While his fellow Marines dug in or prepared for the next day's assault, he slipped away from camp, moving silently through the jungle toward enemy lines. He carried his rifle, but he carried something else more powerful, his voice in Japanese. Alone, under the cover of darkness, he approached caves and bunkers where frightened soldiers and civilians hid. At first, his commanding officers thought he was reckless, maybe even suicidal. No Marine was ordered to do what he did, but Gabbaldon believed he had a chance, however slim, to save lives. Standing outside a cave, he would call out in gentle conversational Japanese. He did not shout threats. He did not bark orders. Instead, he spoke of rice and fish, of family waiting at home, of safety and dignity if they surrendered. He told them the Americans would not harm them, that prisoners were being fed and treated well. Sometimes hours passed with no reply, only silence from within the darkness. But eventually, voices would answer, shadows would stir, and one by one, men, women, and children would emerge with hands raised. His first success came early in the campaign. A handful of Japanese soldiers crept out of a cave after hours of listening to his calm words. For Guy, it was proof that persuasion could pierce the armor of fear. As more groups surrendered, word spread among his fellow Marines. Some still doubted him, but others began to recognize that he was achieving results no one else could. By early July, the battle had pushed the Japanese to the northern cliffs of Saipan. The desperation there was beyond imagination. Entire families gathered at the edges of Suicide Cliff and Banzai Cliff, convinced that death was more honorable than capture. Mothers held infants in their arms and leapt into the sea. Fathers pulled the pins from grenades and embraced their children in one last fatal act. The cries carried across the island, chilling even hardened Marines who had seen combat before. It was in this setting that Guy Gabbaldon reached the defining moment of his war. On July 8, 1944, he set out on one of his most daring missions. Moving quietly through the northern terrain, he approached a complex of caves packed with soldiers and civilians. No one knows the exact words he used that night, for there were no witnesses, no recordings, only his account and the outcome confirmed by military records. But the result was undeniable. By morning, Guy led back to American lines a procession of 87 prisoners, a mix of soldiers clutching their weapons awkwardly, civilians holding children close, and elderly parents who had been ready to die. One Marine described it as unbelievable. A single young man walking calmly at the head of a column of enemy prisoners, guiding them to safety. It was a scene that defied everything they had been told about the battle for Saipan. In one day, Gabbaldon had achieved what entire companies had failed to do through force. By the end of the campaign, his tally would rise to an estimated 1,500 prisoners, both soldiers and civilians. In a battle where over 20,000 Japanese civilians died, many by suicide, each person he saved was a victory against despair. The Marine Corps later verified the numbers, and intelligence officers confirmed his achievements publicly in the years after the war. Yet even in the moment, there was astonishment and disbelief. His captain recommended him for the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest decoration for valor. But higher command, including General Holland Smith, downgraded the recommendation. Whether it was because his methods were unconventional or because of skepticism about the numbers, he would never receive the medal. Instead, he was eventually awarded the Navy Cross, the second highest honor in the Marine Corps. But on the cliffs of Saipan, medals meant little. What mattered was life. Every prisoner Guy brought back meant one less suicide, one less soldier dying for a lie, one more child who would live to see another day. In the middle of war's brutality, a teenager from Los Angeles had proved that compassion and cultural understanding could break through walls of propaganda and fear. When the smoke cleared over Saipan, the battlefield was a place of haunting silence. Thousands lay dead. Entire families had chosen suicide over surrender. For the Marines who survived, the victory was costly. But for Guy Gabbaldon, the measure of success was not in ground gained, but in lives saved. His actions had brought more than 1,500 men, women, and children safely into American custody. In the language of war, this was almost unthinkable. One Marine, working alone, convincing more of the enemy to surrender than entire battalions had managed with firepower. Recognition came slowly and unevenly. At first, Gabbaldon was awarded the Silver Star. Later, in 1960, the award was upgraded to the Navy Cross, making him the most highly decorated Mexican-American Marine of the Pacific War. His citation praised him for entering caves and jungles alone, under enemy fire, and bringing back scores of prisoners. Yet behind the medals lay controversy. His captain had nominated him for the Medal of Honor, but General Holland Smith and others in command had downgraded it. Some argued that his actions, though remarkable, did not fit the conventional image of battlefield valor. Others whispered that the numbers were exaggerated, that his claims were too extraordinary to be believed. Doubts followed him even after the war. A Marine language officer who served on Saipan called him a relentless self-promoter, questioning the accuracy of his accounts. But official records, intelligence officers, and his Navy Cross citation all confirmed the core facts. On July 8th, Guy Gabbaldon had led back 87 prisoners in a single day, and by the end of the campaign, his captures numbered well over 1,000. In 1960, Hollywood brought his story to the screen in the film Hell to Eternity. But the movie distorted the truth. The role of Guy Gabbaldon was played by Jeffrey Hunter, a tall, blue-eyed actor who bore no resemblance to the small Mexican-American Marine. The film traded patience and cultural understanding for gunfights and swagger, erasing the very heart of what made Gabbaldon's story extraordinary. For him, it was a disappointment. The Hollywood version turned his humanity into spectacle, his cultural bridge-building into action hero fantasy. Yet the real legacy of Guy Gabbaldon cannot be erased. His story became a quiet but powerful example in the years that followed. Military instructors cited him when teaching psychological operations. They noted how he had approached from a position of apparent vulnerability, using conversational Japanese, patience, and dignity in surrender. His success showed that propaganda could be undone by trust, that even in the brutal crucible of the Pacific War, understanding could save lives. The lessons extended beyond the battlefield. In the decades after, as America found itself in new conflicts from Vietnam to Iraq and Afghanistan, the value of language and cultural knowledge became more evident. Soldiers who understood local customs and spoke to people in familiar tones often succeeded where force alone failed. In many ways, Guy Gabbaldon's methods foreshadowed this modern understanding of counterinsurgency and psychological warfare. But his story was not only about strategy or military innovation, it was also about identity. Here was a Mexican-American boy, raised in part by a Japanese-American family, using that multicultural background to save Japanese lives while wearing an American uniform. His life was a testament to the strength found in diversity. In a war fueled by racial hatred and propaganda, he stood as proof that America's greatest asset was its ability to draw strength from many cultures, to bridge divides rather than deepen them. The war's official histories often emphasize battles, generals, and weapons. But in the human story of the Second World War, the Chen Tran, the Gioy Lan Tu, Guy Gabbaldon represents a different kind of heroism. His weapon was not firepower, but empathy. His victory was not measured in enemies killed, but in lives preserved. On Saipan, where propaganda had convinced thousands that Americans were monsters, one Marine proved otherwise. After the war, Gabbaldon carried those lessons forward. He married, raised a large family, and spent years speaking at schools and veteran events, telling young people that respect and understanding could achieve more than violence. He returned to Saipan and lived there for 2 decades, starting a fishing business and maintaining ties with the island where he had made his mark. In later years, he became an advocate for recognizing Hispanic contributions to American military history. In August 2006, at the age of 80, Guy Gabbaldon passed away from heart disease. He was laid to rest with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. His grave stands among those of generals and presidents, a quiet reminder of a young Marine who chose a different path in war. His adoptive brother, Nanao, who had fought in Europe with the legendary 442nd Regimental Combat Team, lived until 2005. Their lives together told a story of America at war, a Mexican-American Marine saving Japanese lives in the Pacific, and a Japanese-American soldier proving loyalty in Europe, even while his family was imprisoned at home. Together, their legacy reminds us that the Chen Tran, the Gyoy Lan Tu, was not only a clash of nations but also a test of human dignity. And in that test, Guy Gabbaldon's voice, calm, patient, speaking in the language of those he faced, saved more lives than bullets ever could. The story of Guy Louis Gabbaldon is not the tale of a warrior who claimed victory through destruction. It is the story of a boy who chose to build a bridge where others saw only enemies. On the blood-soaked island of Saipan, in the summer of 1944, when thousands of Japanese soldiers and civilians believed death was their only escape, he offered another choice. Through patience, respect, and words spoken in their own language, he saved nearly 1,500 lives. In the brutal history of World War II, where casualty numbers climb into the millions, each life preserved seems small against the tide. Yet for every mother who walked out of a cave with her children, for every soldier who lowered his weapon and chose to live, the difference was everything. One Marine, barely 18 years old, reshaped the destiny of families who would carry his gift of life through generations. Guy Gabbaldon's legacy is more than military recognition. It is the lesson that compassion can be a weapon stronger than any rifle. It is proof that cultural understanding can silence the lies of propaganda. It is the reminder that America's strength has always come from its diversity, from the voices, traditions, and courage of many peoples united in one cause. World War II is remembered for its vast armies, its tanks, its planes, and its battles that scorched the earth. But within that immense story lies a quieter truth. On Saipan, in the face of despair, one small Marine proved that humanity itself can triumph. And when history judges the war not just by the ground won or lost, but by the lives saved, Guy Gabbaldon will stand among the greatest heroes. If this story has touched you, do not let it end here. Share it, speak of it, pass it forward, because the world still needs voices that remind us that even in our darkest hours, mercy is possible. World War II was fought with fire and steel, but it was also shaped by choices of conscience. Let us carry that lesson, honor it, and live it, so that peace, justice, and freedom remain more than dreams.